So I sent out some information that I received today. If you haven't had a chance to review it, that's understandable. I want to thank everybody for reviewing the material that I sent out earlier in the week and the comments and feedback, which I tried to finesse through Greg and then back to people. Greg, since we have the school committee here, do you want to start with them? And then we can continue on.
Yeah, we can do that. Again, you had requested the FinCom asks that they come, and this isn't so much a formal budget presentation as to just provide an update, as I understand it, to the committee. So I talked to Jim about doing that, and he said he could do that. And I know there are some school committee members, and I think the superintendent's here too.
Yep, she is.
So I guess you can let Jim talk.
If he's here, which I don't
Is
see
he?
him.
Oh,
Yeah,
is
he
he?
may not, but we're not officially at 6:30 either, so.
Oh, okay.
But we did receive an update from Jim last week on the response to the shutdown, and he pretty much outlined in, maybe it was by units, by contract units, what each group was responsible for, how they were managing this, which will be in until May 4th, apparently, right? How's it going, Dr. Gifford?
Well, I've been working today since 7 a.m., just got home in negotiations, etc., and here I am. So it's been pretty stressful, but we're in whatever week, I don't even know, week 3 or 4 now, and I think our teachers are, excuse me, the learning platform that we're using and the lessons and the responsibilities, I think we're getting into a groove now. Things are feeling a little bit better. And I know, like you said, Jim is updating folks on the other people, food service, etc., and I'm sure he'll be able to talk about that. I see him bopping in now. But I want to take this moment then, as we know, and I don't know if I can do that, but this is such an extreme circumstance, and our teachers and our building administrators, our central office staff, I can't say enough about the hours and hours and hours of work that people have put in. And I don't think anyone that isn't involved in this kind of work understands the complexities that we're facing. But I applaud our staff. You know, Dartmouth is very, very fortunate to have the staff that we all do. So, no, we're hoping to make it work.
So the expectation is that teachers have been supporting families and children since school closed, right? And it's going to bump up now to a little bit more formality in the next couple of weeks?
Yes, we have. We created an extended learning page right off the bat when folks were putting up activities, etc. Since then, it's become more formalized. We're just finishing up the district remote learning plan, which really identifies expectations and responsibilities, how many lessons a week folks are putting up, the Google Classroom platforms we're using, the contact that people are making through virtual conferencing with students and families, the student support teams that are constantly meeting. Obviously, everything is virtual, but the reaching out to families that they're doing, the work we're trying to do with our related service providers and special educators to ensure our students that are on IEPs, et cetera, are receiving some kinds of as much support as we can give. Our counselors are holding virtual office hours so folks and parents and kids can reach in. We've been working on grading policies with especially the high school, of course. That's a major concern for folks. But we think we have a good handle on how we're going to adjust for grades, et cetera, through this period, looking at if we just go to May 4th, or if we extend, which potentially that's in the works. And then the fun things that folks are trying to look at way down the road of how do we provide some end of year activities that we know especially our seniors always look forward to. So a lot of planning, but yes, it's becoming more formalized. We did just finish, as I said, some negotiations a bit ago. We've been working on negotiating how that remote plan is rolled out and the responsibilities teachers have. Our TAs as well, they're collaborating with our teachers. So the instructional staff is, I think, under good control to the best of our ability right now.
And we've been seeing, and the reason that I bring this up is that it's not under the Finance Committee's purview at all. It's just to allow people to have an understanding of what's been going on.
Sure.
Because this is going to continue to be funded. So I know that the food service department has been providing meals for kids and families, you know, since the beginning in one form or another. And Jim sent some information about custodial and facility staff and what they've been doing. So I think for the Finance Committee to know that the leadership is there and that those plans have been rolled out and everybody's busy. I think there are people who are more busy now than they are during the regular school year, unfortunately. So thank you for that information. And then I guess I will say to people on the committee, why don't I open it up and see if other people have questions about what's been going on with the school district. Adam.
Quick question. Do you have a handle, or does anyone have a handle on what type of costs reductions there have been, if any, for not having all facilities open for a period of time, or if the expenses have increased? Do you have any idea of
Jim?
what that's going to be like?
Sure. Thanks for having us here tonight, everyone. There's some pluses and minuses. So, and you might expect that. So some things like utilities are going to be less. We were sort of getting out of heating, the major part of heating season. So I don't think heat will be so much a factor as electricity. We don't have any of the new bills yet for electricity from this time period. We only touched a piece of it in our last bill, so we can't really tell. But for example, electricity for the high school is $20,000 a month. So now we're in that building all day long, from early in the morning till late at night. Now, obviously, that's not happening now. So I would anticipate some significant savings in those areas. Sewer and water too, which is a substantial amount of money. And I think, we'd save in those areas. Substitute teachers. People are working. Our staff are working. We don't have a lot of absences at this point, and people are fortunately remaining healthy and are working. So we're definitely saving money in that area. Transportation is something that the state is sort of in process giving us some guidance on, because there's a couple of factors that while we will save money on transportation, exactly how much is sort of to be determined, because when we transportation companies are typically fairly small. There are a couple of big companies in the state. We don't do business with them, but there are a couple of big companies. A lot of them are more family-owned, smaller businesses. We need to make sure, and the state recognized early on, that we need to make sure that there's some continuity of service. So if we go back to school on May 4th, we have somebody to get the kids to school. So there's and there are contractual relationships between school districts and transportation companies that are fairly complex. And there is some recognition that if those contracts were to be litigated, which hopefully they won't be, there would be an acknowledgement that the school districts would be responsible for some costs. Obviously, these companies are buying buses to provide transportation for this service, or leasing them, whatever it may be. And so there would be some costs that the districts would likely be responsible for. I know that the legislators are actually looking at this issue now to try and help hopefully give us some guidance as to what we may or may not be responsible for in that regard. But we will save money on transportation. There are things that I have concerns about. There's things where we're not going to save money. For instance, preschool tuition. So we fund teacher salaries through our preschool program. Well, right now, for this past month, we've not charged people for preschool tuition. We may revisit that, and we've talked about where we're going from here as we provide more remote learning opportunities for preschool kids, whether or not we could recoup some revenue there, but that's still to be determined. And obviously, depending on when we go back to school eventually, it will determine how much of a factor it is. The school lunch program. So we immediately put together a plan in acknowledgement that we needed to make sure that our most needy kids have some support through this time. Dartmouth has about 25% free and reduced lunch population. That's already going up. And we know that people are having a tough time, and obviously there's going to be more and more folks in town unemployed. So we immediately put together a plan to be able to feed kids. At that time, there was no assurance. For any town that had less than 50% free and reduced lunch population, there was no approval to do this from the USDA, which is sort of the governing body of the National School Lunch Program. So the state basically said, okay, well, you're on your own to run those programs. And we did it despite that. And we've been serving about 2,500 meals a week, which I think is a really significant service to the community. We were fortunate that now a week and a half ago on Sunday, the USDA approved a waiver for Massachusetts communities that have less than 50% free and reduced lunch. And we just submitted our first claim today for that, actually. So we are going to be receiving some reimbursement. So on the one hand, our food program is going to be getting far less revenue than it would have previously. It is going to be getting some, and it does have some balance in its revolving account, and we're just doing the right thing, basically. But we recognize that there will be some loss in revenue there. Certainly, there's some smaller areas where, there'll be pluses and minuses. Grant issues are sort of still up in the air. We have our awards for grants, but there may be an impact in the future. I think there's going to be a lot of rules that are still developing where, 4 weeks into this. And I think now we're seeing more and more of the long-term issues begin to be addressed by either the state Department of Education or at the federal level. They're starting to recognize, okay, now we've put in some stopgap measures for the initial period, but there's going to be long-term things that are of a concern to schools like us. So hope that answers the question. I can't hear anybody. I hope that's just, I don't know if that's just me.
Terry, I think you're muted.
Oh,
I'm not muted. Yeah.
I'm talking to you and wondering why isn't anybody responding.
Oh.
Are there any other questions? That was a lot of information. Thanks, Jim.
You're welcome.
Anybody else have questions?
Are we going to ask anything about the budget? Are we?
I think go for it, Beppy. Yeah, go right ahead.
Well, I'm just trying to understand because, since this is new, again, if I look at the material that Greg provided, it shows the budget for the current year is about overall $44.2 million. and your departmental request is 45.6. And there's a lot to it, I know, but can you just tell the 3 or 4 major items there, or 2 to 3 even?
Okay. Okay, so we'll come back to that, Beppy. I was going to say, if you have any questions for the school committee, because we'll let the school committee go if they
Oh, I'm
nobody
sorry.
has questions, and then we'll get back to that.
Thank
You don't even know people, and I
don't.
realize
I
this is the first,
I
we have
don't. I
3
know.
new members of the finance committee for Dr. Gifford and Jim. We have Beppy, we have I'm
That's
looking, Brian O'Hare, and then Janine Simmons. And so they don't even know the players. So Dr. Gifford is the superintendent of schools, and then Jim Kiley is the business manager for the school department. And I'm thinking that you'll be coming back to give us a budget presentation maybe in the next, it'll have to be in the next week or so, because we have to still follow the timeline of the middle of May for the warrant. Is that true, Greg? We're still moving forward with that? Nothing's changed?
Yes, that's true.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah. So we know you've had the hearing. Lou has let us know that you did the budget hearing already. Have you voted on the school budget yet? No. Okay.
No.
So
Thank you.
we'll wait for you to come back with that. You're aware, and I'm sure that Sean has been in touch about the select board's hiring freeze and non-essential spending.
Mhm.
I don't know if
Yeah.
you had, yeah, you're okay. So does anybody else have any questions? Yes, Bob? You have to unmute. There you
Yeah,
go.
just a question. The food service, are you delivering the meals to the homes?
We are with some meals. Some folks who can't make it out there, we are doing a small number of deliveries. For the most part, it's basically a drive-through. So we have meals that we're rolling out. It's at the Quinn School. It's Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 11 to 1. And we are having folks drive up. There's very little contact. Obviously, that's a concern. Our folks have masks and gloves, and we want as little contact as possible to expose anyone. But on a limited basis, we are doing that. If there are folks who need it, we will get them food. Absolutely.
Okay. And just one comment on the bus contract. I know it's complicated, but fuel should be a no-brainer.
Fuel is a big savings, of course. Yeah. There's going to be no fuel. Labor is dependent upon their status with whether or not they still have their folks on the payroll or not. And then there's a few other smaller items, but labor and fuel are the 2 biggest possible cost savings, obviously.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And the contracts are not settled yet, right, Jim?
That is correct.
Okay.
We have all of our DEA contracts, the teachers, the teacher assistants, the full and school year secretaries, and the nurses are not settled.
Okay.
Cafeteria and custodians are settled, and our administrator's contract is settled as well.
Okay.
Terry, may I add one more thing?
Sure.
Sure. I just want to also let folks know that as a reminder, we already had grades 8 through 12. We had a 1-to-1 initiative that we started a couple of years ago. So all of our students from 8 through 12 had Chromebook devices, but we also were able to, with everything that we have in the district with our Chrome carts, it's been a big push, but the tech department was able to gather those, and we've disseminated, I would say, almost 400 devices to students in the other grades so they could have access to the learning platform. So just wanted folks to know that as well.
That's great. Does anybody from the school committee want to add anything, or are there any other questions? Thank you for coming. I didn't expect the whole school committee to be here, so that was cool.
I'm good, thank you, Terry.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good as well, Terry. Thank you, though.
Great.
Nice meeting the new folks.
Yeah, very nice. And we'll see you again. We'll probably have another one of
Thank you.
these before the end. So, well, thank you again. And we can let you go, and we'll just.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Minnie. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
So to jump right into the budget, and why don't we pick up where Beppy asked the question? Greg, did you hear the question?
No.
Okay, I'll ask Beppy to ask it again then.
Okay, I was just, there's so much information that's been provided, and I know you're trying to summarize it, but if I look just at the school section, it was the budget in fiscal year 20 is at 44.2 million, and it actually has it's delineated, so there's, I don't know, various things itemized, but that's the total. And for fiscal year 21, their request is 45.6, and what you have in there still as what the of not increasing staff or anything is still the 45.6. I just want to know what the basic primary increases are there and what they're all about. Is that mostly the benefits, or is that not there?
Well, it includes, they're better off answering it, but it includes step increases. A lot of the employees go up in step increases. It also includes a certain amount for contractual settlements. So a lot of it's personnel related, and then to a lesser degree, it's expense related. I believe I was not given the breakout, but I believe, for example, transportation has gone up. So certain items have gone up, but most of it's personnel related.
But their benefits would not be in that. Would that be in a separate category?
That does not include their health benefits or their retirement, although the town does not cover the teacher retirement. The state covers that. Gets a little complicated, but
Sure.
Teachers are covered by the state system for retirement. Everyone else in the school system is covered under the Bristol retirement system.
But it does include the health. I mean, the numbers here don't include the health. That comes late. That is in a separate section.
That is correct.
And is the section that is in here include what they want for? It's at a later point here, but does that? Are you assuming they get that approved in these numbers?
Does it include, when you say does it include what they want, are you asking about the contract?
Yeah.
So I was going to ask Lou. Lou, I didn't go to the last school committee meeting, but the budget subcommittee that I attended earlier in the year, my recollection is that there were no new staff in this proposal. They were pretty much funding level service. Is that your recollection?
Me?
You have to unmute. No, I'm asking Lou because he's the liaison. You have to unmute. That's okay. I don't think that it includes what principals and teachers wanted in the budget. It includes a level service because in order for them to address contractual requests, they couldn't.
It has to be agreed.
Correct.
Thank you. That's all I need. Thank you.
Okay. So other questions on, we received the letter from the select board, so we know that there's a hiring freeze and people are okay. Are you hearing anything back from people on that, Sean?
No, not right now. And we had less than a handful of positions that were open and currently being advertised, so we've just put those on hold.
Yeah.
And then the spending freeze, we're pretty much through the fiscal year at this point, so it's more, as a sign of what's to come, but just preparing. But the staff have been pretty good. They've been inquiring with me on some purchases of whether or not to move forward with it. So we've been evaluating those as they come along. So they've been good so far.
And you had talked, or I can't remember if you talked about this or if it was in a memo, but you had talked about reconsidering the comp time issue that was gonna.
That's all gone. So that only lasted for 8 days.
Okay.
Because that was, commonly what would happen during a snow event. And because this sheltering issue happened so quickly, that was just kind of the best thing to do. And then in the meantime, we worked with the department heads to develop their continuity of operations plans. Okay. And that included, having all their staff filling roles and doing work remotely. So now it's worked out well. That started Monday. It's worked out pretty well. Staff have been checking in. Some have been coming in to town hall, not many because they have to, or they'll come in to get some things and go. But it's worked out really well.
Okay, Adam, did you have a question?
Real quick,
And then I see you, Jeff.
it's not really a question. It's more of, are
You
there
have to speak up a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Who is R? I'm just curious who's here.
Yeah, I wondered that myself. And then comm director was somebody who was on last week's meeting, and I didn't know. Can you say who you are?
No, they can't. We have them muted.
Oh, you have them muted. Okay.
Yeah, they must be just people from the general public that
Okay.
open meetings.
All right.
Oh, so anyone
Yes, it is
a
live
regular person
stream.
can sign in?
Yep, it is
Oh, I didn't
live
realize that.
stream. So,
Okay, I didn't know. That.
and then Jeff, you had a question?
Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted.
Schedule A's.
Jeff, you
We
gotta
didn't hear you,
restart.
Jeff. Say it again.
Did you send out a projection on revenue?
Yes.
This afternoon.
I don't, when did you send it?
This afternoon.
Hey,
I had sent something for the last meeting. It's very similar to the last meeting.
Oh, so it's not a new one? Or is
Well,
it?
I did include a 5% cutback scenario.
All right, I'll keep looking for, continue on, I'll keep looking for it.
Bob. There you go.
Yeah, I looked at Schedule A, I mean, the total budget was 92,011,000, and the level staff non-discretionary budget is 91,694. So it's $400,000 less. And I thought with the hiring freeze and spending freeze, that number would be more than $400,000.
Well, first of all, it's actually about 317,000, but again, what we were eliminating was non-discretionary expenditures plus additional staff requested. So that was most of our expenditures are discretionary. I'm sorry, did I say we're eliminating discretionary spending and new staff requested? So most of our spending on expenditures is non-discretionary.
So
And,
Greg, how much money in new staffing would be cut? What would be the cost of?
I did not, again, the overall savings was 317,000. The vast majority of that was salary. I did not break that down.
So what positions? Can you just tell us what positions are included in that? So is
That
he-
include, off the top of my head, that includes 2 part-time requests for the COA plus a full-timer for the COA. Also, there was additional addition for a truck driver in the park and rec. There was a request in the building department to take a temporary position full-time. There was conservation. There was an administrative assistant requested. So those were the ones that were eliminated. I can go through the details if
I'm going to
you'd
go to the
like.
questions. Brian had a question, and then Jeff. Brian?
Yeah, I just could you just define for me discretionary and non-discretionary so I understand exactly?
Who
you hear
had
me?
that? Oh, I'm sorry, Brian.
Brian.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, discretionary spending is spending that we typically have a choice on as to whether to spend or not. Non-discretionary is something we are obligated by either law or contract to pay out.
So my question is something like.
So example of non-discretionary would be healthcare. The rules of healthcare are set by law. We cannot, we cannot alter people's healthcare based on whether or not we have the money to pay for certain things. It all has to be done in compliance with the law.
How about things like salaries that are negotiated through contracts?
Those are non-discretionary.
Those are non-discretionary.
Non-discretionary. So those are by law. You can't do anything about those, basically.
Not without negotiating a change.
You can't do
That
anything
means you have
about
to-
salaries, but you can do something about the employees, but that would result in unemployment costs.
Yes, we have the right to lay off employees. That is a management right.
Do you
Okay.
also, one other question, do you also have the right to negotiate in terms of lowering salaries with unions and things like that?
Yes. But
Okay.
but that's
That's all.
not easy to do. Well, obviously.
No, I know.
Jeff, and then Beppy. Jeff.
Yeah, Greg, you know, I found your revenue spreadsheets and I'm confused. If you could just quickly tell me what revenues are we supposed to be looking at for your best shot at the budget? Which one of these numbers?
I think
I mean,
it's
you
a
got one.
math.
You got one that's 96 million, which is a $5 million increase from the prior year budget, but I can't follow what you're trying to tell us here.
If you see the one that says forecast more aggressive, do you see that?
Forecast more aggressive 5% revenue, that one? Or the first tab?
The first tab, it says forecast more
Okay,
aggressive.
I'm in the first tab and it says projection for fiscal 2021 is 96.5 million total.
What row, Jeff?
You're at
Row 39.
Gotcha.
you're at forecast more aggressive.
Forecast more aggressive tab, line 39, fiscal year
Yeah.
2021, projection with school request and town. I don't know what that means, but it says 96,597,000, right?
The row 40, yeah.
Well, are you? Can you show me what you're looking at? You know how to do that? No.
No, I don't know how to do that. I'm looking.
It's row 40, column BF.
Oh, I downloaded it, so I'm not looking at.
Yeah, I have 96,597,000.
Right.
Yeah.
Total revenue, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I want to know is what was the actual total revenue, or what do you expect the actual total revenue to be for fiscal year 20? The year coming up now, ending June 30th of this year.
Well, I expect.
Is that anywhere on here?
It's on the sheet called revenue expenditure with actual local.
Okay.
Do you
I'm
see
there.
that one?
Yeah.
So
Where do I go?
for 20, I'm expecting the actual revenue will be 94,533,000.
Okay, so even though the budget was like 91, you're expecting 94.
Yes, because we, as I've explained before.
Yeah, I know that. I understand. I understand. So 94 is a good number for the expected or projected actual for this year.
That
And you're
is a good number for the projected actual.
And you're expecting an increase in $2 million in revenue to next year, to fiscal 21?
Yes.
Well, just briefly, what's the 2 million coming from?
Well, the big one is the tax levy. Every year we are able to raise under Proposition 2.5 the levy by 2.5% plus new growth.
Okay, and for us to fall into a deficit operating budget, we'd have to lose roughly 4 million of your projected budgeted revenue, right?
We would have to, this does not include unused appropriations and budgets, but yes, we would have to lose at least that much to fall into an actual deficit, although we still have some leeway in that there's unused appropriation.
Right.
So the two things that go into undesignated fund balance are, the big things are unused appropriations and difference between revenue actual and revenue estimate.
Yeah, and 4%, $4 million bucks, about 4% of the revenue.
Yeah, I would say that's true, yes.
Okay, so, and you don't think there's much, from everything you're seeing in other towns you're talking to, the idea that we would, I mean, you got companies out there losing 50% of their revenues, but you don't expect that we're going to be anywhere near a loss of 4% of revenue for Dartmouth.
Well, I gave a scenario of a 5% revenue deduction. I did not include the tax levy, which is quite important because the tax levy is 70% of the revenue.
Yeah.
But
Right.
at this point, as I have stated in an email, at this point, that's my best guess. I can't tell you, though, one of the reasons why we're doing this hiring freeze and such is the revenue uncertainty. I think it's likely we will continue to take in the majority of our revenue, but I think it's also likely we will see a decline. As to how much, I don't have any empirical data at this time to base that on. So I know a lot of communities are using 5%, and that's kind of what I was using as well.
Personally, I would think 5% is kind of thin, first of all. Second of all, the 92 million has already assumed the hiring freeze, right? I thought the $92 million budget already assumes the hiring freeze.
The 92 here is
on the schedule.
The 92 here is on the revenue side.
No. The 92 on your schedule A's, the total spending already assumes a spending freeze, right? I mean, we're looking at revenue here, but on the expense side,
I think it's only that we don't fill new positions. They've requested position. I don't think it includes the freeze. Am I correct on that?
Well, it only includes contractual increases, right? And step increases. But it doesn't.
But if there's an current empty position that we've said we can't fill it, it doesn't assume, I don't think he's carried that forward into the next fiscal year, those positions.
Is that true?
That's a question.
Is that true, Kurt?
For next fiscal year, we are not recommending any new positions, but also until we change our position on the hiring freeze, we would not be filling the positions from this year that are unfilled.
Right. And so your latest Schedule A summary reflects that, what you just said, right?
Are you asking?
This Schedule A does not reflect that. That does not reflect that.
Okay, does not reflect that.
But again, this is based on budgeted. This isn't the expenditures you see here are not true expenditures. They're budgeted expenditures.
I understand.
That's important. And I can't tell you at this point how much we're going to actually spend for fiscal year 20. I can give you a good idea, but that's still not, the fiscal year is not completed yet.
Yeah, all I'm saying is if you do face a 10% drop in revenue, you're going to be looking at a $5 million deficit against spending, and I assume we have some plan B on how to deal with that, right?
Yeah, I do not foresee a scenario for fiscal 20, given the level of our undesignated fund balance.
I'm thinking 21.
21, as basically we would have to look at, and this is getting back to Brian, what he was saying, because of the inflexibilities as in law, we are limited in what we can do. So the majority of our expenditures are personnel related, and we do have a management right to cut back in terms of position and in a worst case layoffs. So our number one focus in terms of trying to balance the budget, should we have a deficit next year as a result of this crisis, would be to look at reductions in personnel. Because that's where the money is.
Okay.
Right.
And then Brian. Bob?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Bob.
Okay. Yeah, I just, for my company on Tuesday, I applied for that SBA loan where the federal government's going to give us 2.5 months worth of salaries, and if we don't lay anybody off, they're going to forgive the loan. And I also heard that coming down the line, there's going to be something similar for cities and municipalities. And I was just wondering, Greg, if you had heard anything on that yet. I know it's really for you, but
I've heard chatter, but again, a lot of it is some congressperson or something saying it, and until it gets addressed at the national level, I don't spend a lot of time listening to it.
Okay.
There's so much that's said.
And I'll also add to Greg's point, a lot of times, on the state and federal level, they don't act as quickly as private businesses do. So even if they're going to provide some stimulus, it's generally after, there's been a decline for some time. We talk about, Greg and I discussed this, if we get back to normal after May 4th, I mean, it's not looking likely, but it could be likely, in which case maybe the economy bounces back and you look at it and the 5% is not a bad estimate. Otherwise, I mean, you might look at it and say, yeah, if we get 6 months down the road and this is still happening, it could be a 25% decline. So it's really hard. I think, we're trying to look at it daily to see, where we're at. But until we get to, say, the end of this month and see, what the future is looking like and what the economy is looking like, then we can get a better handle on where things could be for next year and after.
yeah, I mean, this is almost an impossible budget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're trying to be conservative. Yeah.
Somebody asked what the town did during the last fiscal crisis, and I was not involved in town municipal workings at all at the time, but I worked for a school district, and the stimulus bill that came out then was for things like capital expenditures, one-time expenditures, and it was a reimbursement program. So it as Sean said, it came out much later than the crisis itself, and for municipalities, it was very, very different. So I think it's impossible. People are they're saying you can't even compare the two crises because this is health related. It's complete, as Bob said, it's a completely unique situation. And I think some of this, we're just going to have to wait. I just want to say one thing before Brian too. Brian sent out a whole list of thoughts, which I thought was very helpful for us just to think about. Now that we know the difference between discretionary and non-discretionary, you can go through that list and see what we might have control over and what we don't. And I think that will help consolidate kind of recommendations that we make moving forward. So Brian, you were going to ask something?
I was just going to say, Greg, when you said if the deficit turns out to be more than 5%, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I can.
Oh, if the deficit turns out to be more than 5% on your the aggressive negative budget, you said the only thing you could do practically is the reduction in staff all across the board if you had to have a balanced budget. But does that include municipal employees? Is that municipal employees plus school employees or just municipal employees?
Well, first of all, I was saying the major source of money is in personnel. So I want to make it clear there are other things the town could do to cut back expenditures. But I was pointing out in a major deficit situation, you have to address personnel. There's you can't avoid that. But I want to make it clear we would do whatever was possible to avoid that, to cut back in other areas before we touched upon that. But that having been said, certainly any cutbacks would have to include both the town and the school. In our general fund, the spending is dominated by the school side of the budget. So, kind of like the federal government, which, they spend a lot of time focused on 15% of the budget to balance the whole budget. You got to go where the money is, and that would have to include the schools, in my opinion. as well
Right, so-
as well as the town.
I just have one other comment. It seems to me, prudently going forward, we should be in next consequent meetings looking at what different percentage cuts, if the revenue falls below, what we should be doing so that we're not forced into having meetings where there's like, very little time to talk about things, and it sort of like gets pushed through because we didn't do our homework before we begin. That's what I'd like to avoid. That's all I got to say.
Effie?
Thank you. I have a few questions, if I may. I want to make sure when we talk about non-discretionary employees, just answer me, does it include
Spending.
police? Spending. And yeah, is that includes police? So if a police officer leaves, they get to refill it? Currently.
Well,
If it's a critical position like a police officer, yes.
Right. They would get to refill it.
Correct, because that
Okay.
is, that's
Second, DPW?
DPW. No, we had a heavy equipment operator position that was being advertised, and that was pulled.
Okay. There was a line also that I saw in some page that talked about police cruisers and school technology at 617,000. And that is,
let me correct you. That's actually 374,000. You're looking at the offsets on the cherry sheet.
I don't know what that means.
You're looking at, we get monies from the state, and they are certain things that we get monies from the state, but it doesn't go to the general fund. So offsets are monies that go specific to departments. So for example, in that 670,000, I believe the two major ones are the library. They get dedicated monies that go to the library, does not go through the budget process. And by far the biggest one is school choice.
Okay.
School choice for the schools goes direct to the schools. It does not stay in the general fund for general purpose.
Okay. Then this is probably the more important question. It has to do with the whole revenue sheet that you have here. And you said, I'm using, I think, the sheet that you wanted with the aggressive. You say that we're going to be at, I can't remember the number, 94 million this year. And so it's about $2 million more next year. And you had previously said that's mostly coming from local receipts, correct? Because you think the local receipts will actually be higher than what we had budgeted them.
No. What I was trying to convey is each year when we assume revenues, historically, we have always assumed the tax levy, which assumes 100% collection.
Right.
For state aid, we have always assumed what the state tells us they are going to give us. So all those numbers are based on, basically actuals. So in the case of local receipts, in the past, we have, because of increases in the amount of local receipts, we were conservative and we maintained estimates below actuals.
Okay, I got all that. Fine.
Yeah.
But that's one area that's growing for next year. I want to go back up to, you said the tax levy, and I go right at the top of the page. You have the base levy in fiscal year 20 at 61.9 million, and then it goes up to 21 to 64.2 million.
Yes.
Then down below you have the 2.5%. So I don't understand what the 61.9 to 64.2. Why did that grow by so much? That's not 2.5%.
The 64 million, using the 64 million, you have to take the base levy plus the 2.5% plus the new growth and add those three together.
I see. So you take those three, then you bring them up to the next year, and then the next you add those three again and put it up to the top, and then you add 2.5 on top of that.
Yes, but you cannot factor in debt exclusion. So debt exclusion is separate and apart from the, that's excluded outside of the levy. So,
Thank you. That makes sense. Now, you did have, in your second tab, you had a slightly more conservative, but you still, I think you didn't have that degree of, you had lower growth. Just a little less
no,
growth.
I, in all of the tabs, I assume the same growth. What tab are you referring to,
Looking at your
please?
second tab that says, more aggressive. Tab 1 in your revenues has 600.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I did assume a cutback in new growth. That is
Okay.
correct. I'm sorry. I apologize for that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I can see how that all came together now. Thank you.
Yes.
How's everybody doing? Jeff?
Yeah, Greg, I just wanted to know, where are we standing on the 2019 audit? Has that been issued yet?
It is in draft format. I need to give them one thing with OPEB and it can be finalized.
Not something that I could get a copy of yet?
I have the balance sheet. I can give it to you.
All the balance sheets?
Everything but the OPEB.
Okay. Yeah,
Greg,
if you can send me that.
if you send it to me, I'll send it out to everybody so they all get it. Anybody else have any questions on the materials that were sent out? You received the efficiencies report, right? Greg's working on the warrant language. And you also received the information from the planning board. Will people be able to attend that planning meeting? Beppy's going to speak with Christine O'Grady tomorrow. I'll be in on that call, and then we'll have a joint meeting with the select. Well, they're going to do a presentation for the finance committee. When I see you, I can't look at the other things that came out because I'm on my computer. I'll figure this out as we go on. But so the two meetings that are upcoming are one planning board presentation to us because there are articles that are going forward regardless of the emergency situation. We have to hear them. And then we have a joint meeting scheduled with the select board. Any conflicts with those?
The planning board's the 13th.
Mm-hmm.
And then our joint meeting is the when? What date?
With the select board?
The select board is the 13th.
May 11th.
No, but
there's a joint meeting. Well, just from the select board's perspective, there's a joint meeting with the planning board this Monday, the 13th.
With the select board, planning board, not finance committee though, right? No.
And I think there's, if I recall, I can't remember the planning board calendar. There's a different date for the joint meeting with the finance committee, and then there's
planning board.
Correct. And then May 11th.
We don't know that date. You don't know that date.
I don't get it to you now, Jeff, because I'm on my computer, but I can look it up.
I'll look.
Oh. What was that?
Right now, it's let's see.
Do you have it, Bob?
April 16th is what I have on the calendar.
April 16th. 7 o'clock?
Yeah.
The 13th is the planning board meeting. Sorry, the 16th.
I honestly can't help you. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
April 16th is what's tentatively planned for finance committee and planning board joint meeting.
Okay, so that's our regular finance committee time.
Yeah.
Right.
We're meeting next
That's Thursday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
that's our regular time.
And then when was the one with the select board? I heard
May 11th.
May 11th.
Okay, but am I correct? That's not with the select board. They meet with the select board, and we just meet with an open meeting.
But we have a joint meeting with the select board. I know we have that scheduled. We usually have it with the school committee, but I apologize. I can't do the technology here with looking at my computer and then looking this up. I'm going to have to get back to you on that.
Okay.
We had talked about it, I think the last meeting, Terry, the joint meeting with the FinCom and the select board to review the warrant articles. And I think we had it scheduled originally for May 4th. We went back and forth. That date didn't really work that well for your calendar, so we had changed it to the 11th.
The 11th. Because we needed time to get our warrant done in order to discuss
Right.
things with the select board. So we asked for that to be moved back. We have
Correct.
to be finished by the 13th, I think it is, for the warrant.
I'm reading Christine O'Grady's letter now that
Yes.
came to us. And she said, blah, 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 blah. The board has a pre-meeting scheduled with the select board at 6:30. This is this next Monday. That is followed by the public hearing. The planning board has requested at its meeting this past Monday that I extend the invitation to the finance committee members to participate in the public hearings, not in the select board portion of the meeting.
Right, so we're being invited to just at least listen to the public hearing on Monday night, which I
Yes.
think is helpful because then when we have the joint meeting on Thursday, at least we'll have knowledge of these articles.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you for that help.
Yes.
So we can watch the meeting with the planning board and the select board on DCTV. And then we could go to Zoom and participate in the public hearing on the plan with the planning board. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if it's Zoom or if it's,
I can provide some clarification on that.
okay, thanks, Sean.
It could really complicate things. So the way it's working is the select board is meeting live in their general hearing room, but the planning board is going to be having their joint meeting through Zoom. So the planning board is going to open their Zoom meeting at 6:30, and then they're going to meet with the select board. And then after that's done, the planning board meeting stays live and the select board go away. So if you wanted to be there for their whole meeting, you might want to get onto their Zoom meeting right at 6:30. That way you don't have to leave.
And I'm imagining that's going to be posted, right, Sean? The information for being able to watch is going to be posted?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And is the meeting number going to be the same that we used to get on here today?
No, I have to check with DCTV on that. I'm not sure.
Okay.
There's a different ID for every meeting, apparently. And I will let you know, just in case you missed it in the email, that because of the cyber issues with Zoom, there's going to be a password required for our next meeting. So I'll get that information out to you when it comes from Peter. Okay. So thank you for the clarification. So Monday night, there will be a pre-meeting with the planning board and the select board, 6:30. We'll get you the information to be able to watch that. The suggestion is for us to all listen to the hearing so that we can be ready for questions when they present to us next Thursday night. And then we'll have our annual, semi-annual joint meeting with the select board, and I'll get you the information for, I think we're doing great so far. This is amazing to me that we can continue this process. It's been very easy, and I thank BCTV. I thank you all for, being flexible on the information that comes and being ready with the meeting. It's very helpful. So that clarifies the planning board piece. There's going to be warrant. Greg, what are the chances that you're going to have the warrant language for us? Let's roll the dice and say Friday. Let's be optimistic. What do you think?
This Friday? Tomorrow?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Monday. What do you think?
I think Tuesday's more realistic.
Okay, so then we're going to hold you to that. Tuesday, right? All right.
Boy,
But I want to
you'd rather
stress
have the coronavirus, huh?
it will not include all the numbers. So
The template will be great, just to have what the issues are, so that, because the conversation, having a few new people, it's very helpful to talk about how the process works, especially their first time through. So even if it's not anywhere near done, it'll get us going.
okay, and you already do have the list of the articles.
So Greg, I noticed that you had some highlighted articles that you anticipate will be postponed till the fall.
Well, my hope, but I can't guarantee that.
Yeah, I think initially Greg and I were looking at the warrant and we were thinking, well, we'll really pare it down and because of everything that's going on. And then when we looked at all the warrant articles, we're like, well, there's not that many that can get removed because a lot of them need to get pushed through. So there were a handful, but we thought we'd really be paring it down to maybe 10 or 12 and then when we start looking at it, you're like, well, it's going to be pretty full.
Is there any conversation going on with the select board? I didn't watch the meeting for this week, but about how to manage a town meeting if we have to continue social distancing?
No, we talked about, really, we've just talked about the governor's order that allows the town, there's a few different ways that allows the town meeting to be postponed. The moderator can open it and continue it to another date. And the bill that was passed just kind of stipulated that it can't be more than 30 days. But that, our big concern right now was, what about the warrant? And it's not like the warrant can be delayed. Originally, I think the thinking was, well, we'll just move everything, the whole schedule, but the warrant still needs to be completed on time. So that's why we're kind of hustling. And then we're going to kind of play it by ear through this month and then look at, okay, if things are lifted in May, then we say, all right, well, maybe we can still do it in June, or maybe it's got to be sometime later in June. I think we're kind of playing it by ear, but in the meantime, we're getting the warrant prepared on time. So no, there's no decisions been made, but that's been the logic behind it.
Okay, so in terms of budgets that we have to hear from, we're going to hear from the school committee. What do you think? I don't have the date right now of their budget hearing when they're going to be voting on their budget, but will they be planning to come back next week and do a presentation, Greg? Have you had any conversation about that?
I have not.
Okay.
Not. So I can't.
And we talked about you just putting the rest of the budgets together and not necessarily having, is there any other budget that we think we need to hear from the department heads?
I think if Sean and I do our budgets, that will be the majority of them. I think that the schools are by far the most important that you have not heard from.
Okay. Now, Melissa sent us a list of positions that were on hold. Did anybody have any questions on that?
Well, actually, my question maybe would be if you annualize those positions, we said you can't even fill them, what would it be? I'd bet it's not a lot, but it'd
I'm
be
sorry,
worth.
say that again. I didn't hear that, Beppy.
If you go ahead.
If we were, my understanding is those positions, in the next year's budget, it assumes that they are being filled. If we were to annualize those salaries and benefits, whatever it may be, what would that savings be if we were saying you can't even fill the open positions?
Oh, I mean, we can calculate that and give you.
I bet it's not a lot, but it might be a few $100,000.
Yeah.
It would definitely be a few $100,000.
Yeah, well, that's a few $100,000. That might be.
It's not, I mean, and Greg can elaborate on this, but it's not just salaries, because then you look at this benefits.
Right. That's what I mean. That's right.
25 to 30%. So
I think it'd be worth knowing.
And to follow through on, I think Brian brought it up earlier, in terms of planning, should we be looking at every department and trying to plan for a certain amount to be cut there? Does that kind of a process make sense?
Well, it's, right now we don't know. So it's really hard. Do we say, okay, let's make a cut, everyone cut 3%, or maybe that could be a massive underestimation. And we could say, well, everyone prepare to cut 15%, and that could be an overestimation. So I think level funding right now is the most, logical thing to do. And then, we'd really have to start looking at it. If this downturn lasts through the summer into the fall, then yeah, that's when we need to talk to departments about tightening their budgets, or even through the summer before they start to spend the majority of their budgets, on things that are, non-discretionary but need to be funded, that we would have to look at.
And I guess I would add to, at what point do we have to consider a delay on some of the things that we talked about in terms of capital expenditures? How will we know when it's time to say we can't buy new computers, we can't buy new cars, we can't upgrade? I understand that there's probably capital projects in terms of building maintenance that have to continue if they're at that level, but how do we make that kind of a decision, or how do you advise us to make that kind of decision? I would say Greg and Sean.
Well, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Obviously, if we have a actual deficit, then we would have to, severely cut back on our capital. The whole idea of our financial policies is that whatever's in the form of free cash or undesignated fund balance, taking out some liabilities, that it's a calculation the state does, that is available for capital and reserve. I expect that as we tighten the budget, that number is going to go down and there will be less for capital.
Brian?
think,
You muted, Brian.
yeah, I see. I think for my part, I'd like to get some sort of feeling for a rank ordering of what you might look at in terms of making cuts should the deficit be more than what you're projecting now. So in other words, which of those line items would you go to first? And then progressively, what else would you have to do? In other words, going from most likely to least likely, or what you think you can do, or what the worst case, the best case, worst case in terms of making cuts.
A lot of that is political decisions. Our goal as administrators is to make sure that the budget's in conformance with the policies as adopted by the town. In terms of a ranking between, say, police versus schools, that's a decision of our policymakers, which would takes the form of the select board and the finance committee. But certainly we would try to cut expenditures that we would do the least harm. We would focus on the discretionary spending, and I think we'd be very, very careful to hire any staff that was not completely essential. But ultimately, if we had to go to layoffs, we'd have to that would have to get into that detail that you mentioned.
Well, I guess that detail is overkill. But I guess what I'm really asking is, how can we think about in terms of least disagreeable, and then rank order downwards and getting more disagreeable if the budget deficit should be larger than what you think it might be?
It's going to come down to services, Brian. It's going to come down to
All right,
services. You have to decide what services you're going to cut. The town's going to cut.
Well, but that's my point. That's my point. Who decides that? Who recommends
I do think that this is where, in the efficiencies report, the recommendation was to look at the strategic plan. We don't have one. To look at the, to have a steering committee. We don't have one. And I think one thing that could come out of this crisis is that the select board, and I would ask Sean to convey this, and maybe this would be a good exercise to begin now. Those joint meetings are not always the most productive, and one really productive outcome for that might be to start talking about how we would make those kinds of decisions in a low stress environment, because otherwise what you hear from people is reactivity. When we run into this, I've worked in school departments, and I know it comes down to the department whose is more important than somebody else's. Everybody feels that their job is the most important, but in a bad situation, how do we make those decisions? And if it's the select board and the finance committee, I'm sure the finance committee can have this discussion and establish priorities, but I think the select board would need to do the same thing. And we would need to have some agreement on how we would come to that, as would the school department.
Yeah, I was going to say that, Terry. I think we'd have to include the school committee in that meeting, because that's a large portion of the town's budget. So, not that that's very important, but when you look at just general government, we can cut, but it's really not that significant. just budget-wise. But we would certainly look to make the most extensive cuts we could, and look at ways to save money, and still offer good services. But we'd have to have the school involved as well.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess think about that and think about how we might pose that question to the select board and to the school committee, and get that out to them to at least begin the discussion on May 11th. We may not be able to come to any conclusions, but it would be good to have a framework. Until we were hoping that this town plan, this 10-year town plan process would result in some general goals, but that's on hold right now, obviously, and I don't know if it will result in that anyway. Beppy?
Just one comment. I do think there's the opportunity for, prioritization, but I also think there's the opportunity. To me, looking at this, looks very stovepiped, and the opportunity is, can there be some organizational merging and stuff like that would bring some of these things together and have a person with a greater span of responsibility, and therefore, a little more latitude in prioritize. Let the manager prioritize if they have a certain amount of a span of control. But when you look at this long list of expense areas, and each one has its own little thing, it doesn't seem inefficient, if not ineffective, or sub-effective. And one other thing, there's also all those, I can't remember the name, all those enterprise funds. And I do think we've got to return to that some second. Say, is there another, I can't remember, Greg, you would know, is it another $15 million? Is that, I can't remember what the number is.
Probably 11 to 12.
Okay, 11 to 12, and that's, we should look a little bit at that, but that's maybe not today's job.
Brian?
I agree with Beppy. The issue, though, I have with consolidation, I don't have any issue with it at all, really, but it's just the amount of time it'll take. So I think, again, there's got to be some prioritization.
Yeah, it's
and going forward, consolidation of departments and switching employees around, that's a good idea. But that isn't going to help us initially.
The challenge, though, and I don't know how we get to this, but the challenge, because when I first joined the finance committee, I remember going to the previous administrator with the question about how to deal with something from one department to the next. And the answer that I got was that there was no way that could be addressed because they were two separate boards, and everybody has their boards and their processes, and it's a decentralized government. And it doesn't make sense to me, but I think we have to think about how, and I believe we've influenced that process because we've been talking about the need for departments to work with each other for years. But when you start, again, what department is more important? Obviously, the police department is important, but is it more important than some of the other departments that we have, and how are those decisions made? I don't know the answer to that. I just know that it's an obstacle that we've run into before.
I think Greg says it best when it's a government of consensus. So you've got to get departments and boards, and for the most part, it's worked well in the past. But the town is growing, which is great. But then sometimes you've got to look at the processes and the control and the management to do things better, so that you can be more nimble when it comes to situations like this with the economy and finances, where you're able to kind of move staff around. And it's unfortunately, it takes a long time to change because it's political. B, you have collective bargaining units, and then you have a culture that needs to change too. So we're certainly working towards that every day, and trying to provide services more broadly and online to help alleviate some of that and make it more I guess centralized.
Brian, and then Greg. Brian?
I'm new to this, but and I agree with what Sean has said. But it's got to start someplace, and the only place it can logically start, seems to me, is with the select board, because they're the ones that ultimately have the power to make decisions along these lines. So we have to at least have the conversation.
And I would add that, in the past, our joint meetings have been basically the finance committee going through the warrant and saying what we think about every warrant article. And I don't think that's a very productive conversation. I think this kind of a conversation would be more productive. I think we can do our draft and let them know in advance what our recommendations are. And we do have to start doing that, by the way, because it's April. Probably next week, we probably need to start voting on some of the articles. But that's the detail and the minutia. I think you're right, Brian, to get this conversation started, why not do it then? And then Greg and then Bob. Greg, you had something?
Yeah, the one thing I do want to stress is the town has attempted during my tenure, has looked repeatedly at areas to create greater efficiencies. So it is not like we have not been doing that. I can cite many examples. If you gave me a 10-year period, when I first got here, the ambulance, we used to pay the ambulance $340,000. Now they pay us $50,000. When I first got here, we paid about $90,000 more in pension. We pay it now in one lump sum, save ourselves $90,000 there. Last I checked, we used the NSTAR energy rebate program at least 14 times in the last 10 years. And that was 2 years ago, so it's probably more like 20 times. So we've undertook major projects in terms of trying to cut back on energy. We took a lot of our capital and bought new equipment, which operating costs are significantly less than what we had previously. We took old Tauruses, replaced them with Priuses. We took trucks in DPW that have high maintenance cost, and now they have far less because they're much newer and inconsistent with replacement cycles. So we've done.
Those are good examples, and one of the things that I'd like to see is that we have a plan that has those goals on them. These are things that, for example, when I was interested to see in that efficiency report, the recommendation to recover administrative costs from the fire district. It'd be great to have some document that said, this is where we're headed, this is what we've accomplished, this is how we've made those efficiencies.
Yeah.
Because
one thing I want to stress about that efficiency report.
Yeah.
The vast majority of those recommendations did not come from outside consultants. They came from us. That thing about the fire district, I can show you the emails where I myself gave it to them. The thing about the consolidation of the software between the schools and the town, so a lot of the vast majority of those recommendations were internal.
There's no doubt in my mind that people have great ideas in this district, and
But the thing I want to reinforce to Brian, and that whole issue of low-hanging fruit. You pick the low-hanging fruit, and you have to go up the tree. And as you go up the tree, it's harder and harder to pick the fruit. That's where the town is. The vast majority of the low-hanging fruit has been picked, and it was picked actually some time ago. We're now in the stage where making changes is more difficult due to political issues, due to legal issues, due to contractual issues, due to structural issues. So, but we have been trying everywhere we can find, efficiencies. That is our desire. Our goal, and Sean's goal, is to provide government in the most efficient, effective way possible. And that's constantly looking at efficiencies. We continue that. We spend a lot of time, Sean does, on technology and how we can use that enabler to cut back on inefficiencies.
Well, if I may just say this, I think we don't know how bad this crisis is going to be. And so I think what we're really trying to do is just say, wow, if it turns out that it's really going to hit our revenue badly, then this is, as some people say, use the opportunity, if you're going to get one. And I don't think we should only have to look inside. We might look at what other towns outside of this area have done very creatively. And I don't know what that is. I'm sure some towns have done some things. And I agree with you, Greg. I have no doubt this town is very lean in how it's, from my observation of this short period of time, I can see we are not, people are not being paid a lot. People are, but that doesn't mean there aren't some interesting ideas.
There is always room for improvement, but a lot of the things where you could save a lot of money aren't easy to do.
I'm sure.
We could,
yeah.
for example, we looked at central dispatch, regional central dispatch. A major study was done on that. It concluded it was not practical. We've looked at privatization of solid waste services. Studies have come back showing that was not going to save the town significant money. We've looked at privatization of food service. We did privatize cleaning services on the town side of government, which saved us a little money. But we have looked over and over for areas of greater efficiency. And again, it's extremely difficult when you're dealing in an environment. Again, there are political issues involved, there are legal issues involved, there are contractual issues involved. It's very hard to make significant change in government quickly.
Legal and contractual issues are one thing, but I think that the political issues could be minimized if there was a strategic plan. I think that if there was some direction that we knew we were headed in, and if some of what you said was formalized, Greg, I think that could help with the political end. Yeah. Bob, you've had your hand up for a while. Yep. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm hoping that we don't get to a point where we're talking about shutting off the street lights, cutting music programs and cutting, sports programs, because that's what I call blood in the streets. And that's where the political part gets involved. And, the cuts are made to upset as many people so that they respond, not wanting to cut things. And because I think we went through that the last time, and I'm hoping that we don't have to go through that this time, because if we don't, then I think we've missed an opportunity.
I agree.
We have spent a considerable degree of effort to build fiscal flexibility into our budget, and the reason we did that was largely not just to have a viable capital plan, but also to prepare for a downturn. So we are fortunate that we have greater fiscal flexibility than most communities. We are ranked a AAA community. The majority of communities in the state are not ranked AAA. In this area, we're only one of, I think, 3 or 4 that are currently AAA. It's always going to be difficult if you're dealing with a multi-year period in which your revenue picture changes dramatically. If you're dealing with ever-increasing costs, obviously that presents some challenges. But fortunately, we do have some fiscal flexibility that gives us options that perhaps other communities would not have.
Okay, any other comments or questions on the agenda for tonight? So we'll listen in on the meeting Monday night, the budget hearing for the planning board. Whoever can do that will be helpful. We'll plan on the planning board coming next week to our meeting. It's a little early, I think, for the school committee, but I'll follow up to find out about that. And I think we should probably get started on the warrant and start voting as many of the articles as we can. You agree with that? That good with people? Okay. Anything else that people want to talk about? Thank you again for the time that you're taking to preview for this. And I realized I didn't formally open the meeting. We didn't do the Pledge of Allegiance or anything like that, but anybody want to make a motion to adjourn? And I hope you're all well. I hope everybody that you care about is well. And I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Sure, I'll move.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, good night, everybody.